Welcome to True Crime Boss. I'm Jarrett Ferrantino, and we're talking about fentanyl and our kids. Two concepts that should never be put together. How about fentanyl and a daycare? The very place you may have left your own children to be cared for by trusted individuals who were supposed to have been trained and as loving to your children as you are. This is playing out in New York City, folks. We've learned that 4 children were exposed to fentanyl when the operators of a daycare and their family were operating a drug distribution operation out of the same place by day where children were, a daycare. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, folks, you'll see Nicholas Dominici, a 1-year-old beautiful little baby boy who was set to turn 2 in November. He died. He was murdered as a result of that drug dealing operation. When the hell are we going to wake up in this country? You know, folks, we talk about the COVID pandemic, the COVID epidemic. We have a fentanyl pandemic in this country, and it's all wrapped in to this opioid problem that we keep hearing about. 100,000 deaths a year. And if this one doesn't hit home, then you are a heartless person. This is not someone who said yes to drugs. This is not someone who started using at a party. This is someone who was dropped off at daycare and breathed fentanyl. And you're going to hear things about fentanyl. You'll hear things, the famous things you hear about fentanyl are the head of a needle. Enough fentanyl that can fit on the head of a needle is enough to kill someone. Let's talk about what was found in this Bronx daycare. A kilogram of a kilo in the drug business of fentanyl. That's 1,000 packets of sugar, folks. Think about it. How many times have you opened a packet of sugar and poured it into an iced tea? 1,000 of those is enough to kill 500,000 people. And children were exposed to it. I often talk about the little things that jump out at me in cases. And as I was reading and watching the news footage of this case in horror, I was watching the individuals inside the daycare with law enforcement wearing hazmat suits. And look, that's part of their job. That's what they have to do. And I respect that. But do you know what I was thinking about when I was watching those officers in hazmat suits? Those little children with no protection, essentially swimming in a pool that the investigators talked about and described as an atmosphere of lethality, folks. It's like a nuclear bomb went off in that daycare. And just breathing this drug can kill you, and did kill this little boy, this beautiful baby, and damn near killed 3 other children that had to be saved with Narcan to reverse the overdosing effects. Where does it leave us? Where does it leave the true crime world? Why are we talking about this? Certainly, drug distribution is a crime. But I'm going to tell you, folks, I've had cases like this. I had a case where a mother and her young toddler son were in a bathroom. And somehow, whether intentional or accidentally, we were never able to prove, this little boy, too, was exposed to fentanyl. And he died. And I prosecuted his mother. And our investigation led us to a manslaughter charge. And she was convicted. The state laws need to change. If you are in possession or cause a child to be exposed, even if it's an accident, to fentanyl, you should be charged with murder and the law should be written. You're essentially dealing with a nuclear bomb and you're responsible for the fallout of that bomb. And that's what needs to happen. That crime needs to be written properly. You see, folks, as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, facts have to be applied to the law. It's not the other way around. The law isn't written to address facts. We need to work. We talk to our legislators. They're worried about dress codes and other bullshit. How about focus on actually fighting this war? Focus on curbing this. And maybe the death of little Nicholas will wake people the hell up. And they talk about like this is a new phenomenon. It's not new. My case was 5 years ago, and it's still not enough to wake people up. I'm haunted by the image of that little boy in my case. And now Nicholas stands with that little boy. A drug death, not a shooting, not somebody caught up in a drive-by in the cartel drug wars. A little baby crawling around in daycare. Imagine the horror for this child's parents who dropped this little boy off, who just started daycare very recently, assuming their little boy was being taken care of. Instead, he was being exposed to a lethal dose of fentanyl. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I've been on the front line of drug prosecutions for a long time. And they talk about heroin. You hear about, there's no more heroin, folks. It's fentanyl. This is what heroin has been replaced by. A synthetic drug that the precursors of which are imported from our friends in China into Mexico. And the cartels make a cheap synthetic drug called fentanyl. And that's exactly what we have here. And you have individuals operating these drug distribution operations out of apartments, out of daycares, exposing you and I and our kids. Something needs to be done. They need to be dealt with as the murderers that they are. It should not be difficult to prosecute individuals who set these events in motion. And that's really why I wanted to cover this case tonight and talk about the challenges that I've had. You'll hear other cases. You may say, Jarrett, there's drug distribution resulting in death. And yes, there is a statute that says that. And there is a statute where people who deal drugs to a user and that user dies can be held responsible. However, many of those statutes, I venture to say most of them, require an intentional distribution, not an accidental distribution. My position is it shouldn't matter. You deal in this stuff, you should be held responsible. And my hope is that that kind of clarification on this law would become a deterrent to people. Will it? Who the hell knows? But at least the people that did this are not going to be in a position to do it to another baby or another group of children. This is the kind of case and the kind of tragedy that how can something good come out of it? We need to take a hard look at what's going on in this country and how these laws are drafted. The individuals in this particular daycare have been arrested. Let's talk about what happened. These children started to convulse and pass out and were dying. And I had a case one time. I said, wow, the baby was dying. The defendant was lying. Think about that. Rather than saving these children's lives, 3 calls were placed. 3 calls. Of the 3, not one was to 911. It was these individuals trying to cover their tracks when they knew they were in trouble. The 4th call went to 911. They've been charged with failing to report the danger of a child and the life-threatening emergency situation with a child. That's part of what they've been charged with. Think about that. Think about how selfish. They recognize the gig is up. These children are dying. While that was happening, a relative of the operator of the daycare center was seen taking 2 shopping bags out of the daycare center. What do you think was in there? Groceries? I bet you it was drug paraphernalia, indicia of drug distribution. Also found in this daycare, fentanyl was found on the mats that the children take their naps on. Let that sink in for a minute. Also found was packaging equipment because folks that aren't familiar with this, these potent drugs are cut into minuscule packages, folks, when they're distributed to assure that the dosages are right and they're distributed in a way that the dealer gets the best bang for their buck. That was all found inside of this daycare. What worse place could you find this dangerous drug? These are the individuals you're dealing with. Now, they're also charged with a federal violation of causing the death of another through drug distribution. There is a federal statute that covers this, and it's punishable by a maximum term of incarceration of life in prison. And let me tell you something. They took Nicholas's life. Their life should be spent behind bars. It's that simple. There were a series of bad decisions made that created this situation. And anyone who was involved and sat by and watched this happen should be held accountable. It looks like that's where we're headed. But people, we need to wake up about the true pandemic facing this country and the lives being lost. This is no longer about your cousin that's an addict or somebody you know that's in recovery. This is taking innocent lives who have nothing to do with the drug trade, aren't even addicts, sadly. That's where we are. We need to wake up and become vigilant at combating this drug, or we will be dealing with this problem and the deaths and the costs associated with it forever. A stand needs to be taken. And I ask you to educate yourself, read up on what's going on out there, and challenge our legislators and our members of law enforcement to pursue this wherever it goes. And let me tell you, folks, here's another thing. This drug poses a danger to every member of EMS out there, every paramedic, every volunteer on an ambulance out there is in jeopardy because they could be exposed to this. And this is the latest. We used to say if you touch it, you can get impacted. People are wearing protective gear, which is not a foreign concept to us. Now, we're in an atmosphere of lethality that fentanyl can be breathed. I mean, where are we headed here, folks? That's where we are in the drug trade and drug dealing today. It is a horror show out there. Educate yourself, challenge your legislatures, and encourage the members of law enforcement to keep knocking down those doors. And those that are addicted, work with them, help them, get them off these dangerous drugs. Because let me tell you, it doesn't only impact those folks that are struggling, it impacts all of us in the atmosphere of lethality. Thank you.